Yeah, glad
Hi.
to see you all online. Some are already my friends, and the others, I hope I can make myself a friend to you in the future, maybe from now on. Okay, first I would like to share my screen. Yeah. So can you see my screen, my PPT?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
good. Okay, I know. So you can see from the screen, this is my topic. The title is The Twofoldness of Nature in Wang Fuzhi's thought. And I'm a scholar from Wuhan University. Yeah, everyone knows this place because the coronavirus. Okay, okay, stop about that. Let's go direct to the topic. So this is outline of my presentation, which has 5 parts. The first part, I'll give you an introduction about Wang Fuzhi, and then we will move to the topic, nature. And after that, I will give 3 conceptions of nature in the history of philosophy. And then the fourth part will deal with Wang Fuzhi's view of nature, which is quite peculiar. And the last part is conclusion and comments. Now we move to the first part. Wang Fuzhi is a famous philosopher in China, but I don't know whether he is famous in the Western world. So Wang Fuzhi born in 1619 to 1692 in the 17th century. He's a late Ming, early Qing thinker. On the one hand, he's commonly considered as a summarizing figure of the previous thought traditions, such as Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. He knows all about them. Yeah. On the other hand, he also encountered and developed an enthusiastic interest in the new thoughts brought about by the Jesuits from the West, for example, Matteo Ricci. But fundamentally speaking, he should be classified as the Orthodox Confucian. So he is very different from the ancient Western philosophers, including the Greek philosophers and the medieval philosophers. Though all of these philosophers should be marked as pre-modern. So this is a simple introduction of Wang Fuzhi. We now move to the second part. This is the topic I'm dealing with, nature as a philosophical problem. As we all know, nature, this world is a big world in our everyday life and also in the philosophical discussions. But in ordinary life, the word nature, it has very complex meanings, and the complex meanings of it are not fully or exactly differentiated. So it remains in ambiguity. But philosophical discussions, we cannot stop at this ambiguity. We have to achieve some conceptualized results that could transcend the ordinariness of everyday life. So this is the aim of philosophical investigations. And in fact, in the history of philosophy, both the Western and the Eastern tradition, we have already different conceptual frameworks, nature that have already been formed. A lot of conceptual frameworks we can see, but now here in my presentation, I would like to explicate only 3 classical conceptions of nature so that we can prepare the way for discussing the peculiarity of Wang Fuzhi's view of nature. I think this peculiarity lies in his demonstration of the twofoldness of nature. So simply put, my purpose of this presentation is to show that Wang Fuzhi's conception of nature depicts a relatively different way to think about the whole universe and man's position within the universe. So now we move to the third part to explicate the three classical conceptions of nature. So the first one, the first conception, I call, or we can name it the modern conception of nature. We can regard Kant as its representative. So let's now see something about Kant's conception of nature. So influenced by the natural sciences, that is the rising of natural science in the 17th century, Kant has formed a modern conception of nature, which refers to the totality of possible experiences or possible appearances, if you like, and its inner lawfulness that is pre-described by human understanding. So this is my summarizing of Kant's statements. And we can find this conception of nature in Critique of Pure Reason. So the next paragraph, I have quoted some statements from Critique of Pure Reason. We read, nature as the sum total of all appearances. This is the material aspect. And the other hand, nature can also be regarded as the original ground of its necessary lawfulness. So this is the formal or general aspect. So combine them together, we can arrive at Kant's conception of nature. So in my interpretation or in my understanding, by Kant, nature is distinctive contrast with freedom. Nature or the phenomenal world is governed by natural causality or physical laws, but freedom or the nominal world points to the peculiar causality of free will. So the first one, I mean, the phenomenal world can be studied by sciences, but the nominal world is beyond any scientific knowledge. So there's a gap between the realm of nature and the realm of freedom. So we remember this. Okay, this is the first conception of nature. And then we move to the second conception of nature. We can take Aristotle as its representative. So we can also name it the Asian conception of nature. Actually, Aristotle in his Physics offered us this kind of Greek experience of nature in its full scope. Yeah, I know there are specialists of Aristotle, of ancient philosophy. I'm not a specialist in this area, but I'm very interested in this area. To my understanding, Aristotle is a quite original thinker. So we now move back to his statements of nature. In Physics, Book 2, we read, by nature, the animals and their parts exist, and the plants and the simple bodies like fire and water and so on. For we see that these and the like exist by nature, for each of them has within itself a principle of motion and of stationariness. So this is his definition or his exposition of nature or forces. Here I would like to cite Heidegger's interpretation. According to Heidegger, forces or the nature in the Greek sense is the presencing of the absence of itself, one that is on the way from itself and onto itself. As such an absencing, forces remains a going back into itself, but this going back is only the going of a going force. I know this is not an easy statement, easy sentence, but the central idea is Fuzhi is self-emerging, but at the same time, it is self-hiding. So I think this is a central point Heidegger wants to make. In my understanding, Aristotle here has offered us more original conception of nature, so which refers to a self-emerging and at the same time self-hiding processing of concrete stems. And in contrast to Kant, here the functional lawfulness comes from the nature itself. It is never an outcome of human understanding. It is not prescribed by human understanding. It comes from the nature itself. It is inside the nature. So this is the, we can see the Asian conception of nature. So we now move to the third conception of nature, which comes from the East tradition. I name it the Taoist conception of nature as 自然. So this is the Chinese characters. So which means this 自然 in Chinese means emerging from and sustaining within itself as such and such. So to prove this, I would like to quote some annotations. Here is annotations of the adjustment of conversaries, the second chapter of Zhuangzi. So Guo Xiang's annotation. He said, the thing creator manipulates nothing. Therefore, things create themselves by themselves. In this way, things exist without any dependence on others. Thus is the right way of heaven and earth. This is my translation. So as we can see, this conception of nature or 自然 is a little bit or quite similar to Aristotle's Fuzhi. This is the Taoist conception of nature. But we cannot stop at this similarity. There's also a difference. The difference lies in what follows. The former, the Taoist conception of nature, cannot be fully understood if we neglect the self-cultivating dimension of the mind. In China, we call this Gong Fu. Yeah, I don't know whether you have heard of this word. I think maybe you have heard of it. It's quite special in the Chinese tradition. Yeah. In Laozi, this Gong Fu, it is described as emptying the mind and keeping calm. Only after you have done this kind of Gong Fu, you can understand what 自然 or nature really means. In Zhuangzi, this Gong Fu is called fasting of the mind, and it's quite similar to the Laozi's Gong Fu. So I want to emphasize here, Aristotle's conception of nature comes from the following attitude, namely, it's some kind of theoretical meditation. But in the Taoist conception of nature, we have to emphasize the other dimension, not just theoretical. It is also practical, and practical in the Chinese sense. So these are the three conceptions of nature. And after achieving this, we can now move to Wang Fuzhi's view of nature. Because with this contrast in our mind, we can locate and make Wang Fuzhi's view of nature more obvious, I think. So the first part, by Wang Fuzhi, nature mainly means the inner essence of a thing or a being, so which depicts the intrinsic motivating principle of that thing. So this conception is not very far away from Aristotle's conception of physics and also the Taoist conception of nature or 自然. But there's something more in Wang Fuzhi's conception. So this inner sense, however, is twofold. So here, I would like to demonstrate this twofoldness in the following 3 steps. The first step is nature as spontaneity and qi as the vital material force. The second step is nature as freedom and xin as the mastering spirit. And step 3, nature as autonomy or full autonomy and xin as the unifying principle. We move to the first step. On the cosmological level, similar to Aristotle and the Taoist, Wang Fuzhi also regarded nature as the self-emerging and the self-sustaining principle of all the concrete existence. We can call this self-emerging and self-sustaining processing spontaneity or Tao. Yeah, the key word in Chinese philosophy. And Wang Fuzhi says this spontaneity is inherited in the qi itself as the vital material force. And the qi here means yin and yang. These two, yin and yang, are complementary, and therefore they cannot be actually separated off. So they should be regarded as some kind of self-motivating and self-forming material. So this is why we have to describe qi as vital material, not some dead material, not just some material cause in the Aristotelian sense. So this is the key point. Qi is something that self-motivating and self-forming. But to a definite and a concrete thing, the qi of this thing has its peculiar self-molding and self-forming schema. So everything, every concrete thing has a unique nature. So in this sense, the nature of concrete things might be similar. So we have classes, but they can never be identical. Every concrete thing in this universe is unique. This is Wang Fuzhi's view. Yeah. So this is a first level, and then move to step 2. One thing should be mentioned here. When the Chinese philosophers talking about qi, talking about the whole universe, their aim is not just about the universe. Their aim concentrates on the human being. Human being is the center of all their statements. So this is the same case in Wang Fuzhi's statements of nature. So concerning the human nature, this spontaneity functions in 2 directions. This is what I call the twofoldness. The first dimension or first direction is definite and prescribed spontaneity. It also has 2 sub-dimensions. The first one is nature as the self-emerging and self-sustaining principle of life. Life in terms of perception, emotion, and desire, the natural life or biological life. But it has one more direction, nature as the self-emerging and the self-sustaining principle of the mind. So in terms of feeling and willing. So this is the definite spontaneity. But on the other hand, we also have indefinite or vacant spontaneity. Here, nature means the freedom. it is the freedom of the embodied mind in terms of free operation, or Vermögenheit, Vermögen, yeah, in Deutsch, so, which can be regarded as transcendental freedom. Our mind has transcendental freedom. This is the point Wang Fuzhi wanted to emphasize here. So, so this is my interpretation, but this is not an arbitrary interpretation. I want to give you some textual proof. The first one is about nature and the qi, the relationship between nature and the qi. Nature and the qi. He says in 读四书大全说, yeah, the nature refers to the peculiar thing that results from the subtle intermingling and condensation of yin and yang and the 5 elements. Yeah, so this indicates that nature has its origin in qi. And the second, it says, concerning the formation of human nature, the body depicts its visible dimension, and the mind depicts its invisible and secret dimension. So this sentence indicates that nature has 2 aspects, body and mind. And the third paragraph, motion and stillness come from the changing and the intermingling of yin and yang. So they are nothing but the moving and the splitting of yin and yang. The human mind henceforth depicts the never-ending processing of closing and opening up of yin and yang. The Tao-accorded mind, in contrast, depicts the real contents of motion and stillness. And the fourth sentence, it says, the mind depicts the tiny springing of closing and opening up of yin and yang. It is therefore indefinite or indeterminate. So we can see from these 2 paragraphs that there are 2 aspects of the mind. First aspect, it functions as principle. The second aspect, it functions as freedom. These 2 aspects are bifurcated, but not splitting. So they have the same root in our nature. So, okay, we have described the twofoldness of nature, but this bifurcation actually in Wang Fuzhi's thought, they should mix again or combine to unify these 2 aspects. So now we arrive at the third conception of nature in Wang Fuzhi's thought. We can name it nature as autonomy, as full autonomy. So nature as full autonomy is the harmonious unification of the above 2 aspects, namely principle and freedom. Of course, we have to pay some efforts to get that harmonious unification. So the process of achieving this harmonious unification is called fully expanding the mind to accomplishing the nature, which refers to an infinite task of self-cultivation of our embodied mind heart. So this is what we call Kung Fu, but this is not Kung Fu in the Taoist sense, but in the Confucian sense. So in Wang Fuzhi's view, there is no insurmountable gap between nature and freedom, which Kant has pointed out. Actually, they come from the same root, so they can unified in a harmonious way. So what we need here is adequate human endeavor or efforts. So I think this is, we put them together, we can get the whole picture, the full view of Wang Fuzhi's conception of nature. Mm-hmm. So this is my conclusion and comment. Conclusion, how should we locate him? Wang Fuzhi's natural philosophy has nothing to do with the scientific view of the universe depicted by the Kantian conception of nature. It is akin to the Aristotelian conception of forces, yet the latter lacks dimension of Hongfu. It is homologous to the Taoist Ziran, but they dispute on the genuine contents of nature. So, and what can we learn from him? I think Wang Fuzhi here offers us a new direction for the Geist Wissenschaft or spiritual science, and he also offers us here a different way to reflect the problem of modernity. Thank you. Sorry for wasting too much time. Okay, thank you all.